I'm pretty excited to be here talking to you guys about this today. This is something completely different than I've ever been involved with. And I think it's kind of a new type of program, and I would almost venture to say the first of its kind. I'm going to give you guys a little bit of background on why we're interested in doing what we're doing, and a little bit of background on the structure of this program, and then give you some details so that when you stop, if you choose to stop at tour stop number 2, you can follow up and get some additional details from that. So Wyoming Restoration Challenge is actually a competition to see what team can restore a degraded pasture back to a diverse, healthy pasture system. John said there was an attempt to do some kind of forest restoration program, competition in Oregon that kind of never really got started. And so we're moving full speed ahead, and in fact we've had, I think my mic, oh there we go. I think we've had a little more engagement than I anticipated that we would have. Can you guys still hear me in the back? Is that okay? Okay, probably better than it was before. So cheatgrass, why cheatgrass? This is the mandatory slide where I'm supposed to tell you that this invasive weed is going to wreck the entire socioeconomic fabric of the western United States, but I'm not going to go quite into that extreme. It is one of the most widespread and problematic invasive plants that we have in the western U.S. People are really concerned about it these days, primarily because of how it affects sage grouse habitat and changes the fire cycle to where we lose habitat quality for that almost endangered species, although we'll find out the story at the end of September about what happens to the sage grouse. It's known for changing fire frequency. It's known for reducing the green window of forage availability throughout the summer, and really it changes the way that an ecosystem can work. How many of you here have not heard something about cheatgrass at some point in time? Okay, so I'm not going to spend that much time on it. I want to put up a few historic quotes just to give some perspective, and I'll cheat and read this. Of all the brome grasses represented in Wyoming, this is the weediest. I think in no place has it been found serviceable as a fodder or pasture plant. It seems to be shunned by stock to such an extent that it may attain maturity almost anywhere. It is not particularly unsightly, but simply a worthless plant. That was from Avon Nelson in 1901. And so Avon Nelson, which I think is really cool that he gets referred to as the botanist, capital T, capital B, in most of the Ag Experiment Station bulletins. So we were already somewhat concerned about this plant as early as 1901 within the state of Wyoming. We've learned some things since 1901 in that we know that it can provide some decent forage at times of the year, but it's highly unpredictable as far as how much productivity we'll see from year to year, based largely on annual precipitation. Nevertheless, its benefits do not necessarily outweigh its liabilities, unless you're planning to embrace the cheatgrass, as Larry Kundle would tell us to do. We'll probably hear more about that later. This is some results from a project that was funded by the Ag Experiment Station. It may be a little bit hard to see in the back where we modeled, a grad student of mine, Karen knows, where they modeled what we would call the potential impact niche of cheatgrass. So the different colors show the probability of cheatgrass reaching greater than 50% of plant community composition across our state. And just to point out, as we get into the 3 lighter shades, all of those are greater than 50% probability. The white means that it's greater than 90% probability of it becoming dominant. Well, in this particular figure, we overlaid sage grouse core areas, and the take-home picture is really that there's a high percentage of the state that could potentially be negatively impacted by cheatgrass, and a high proportion of that falls within the sage grouse core areas. So it's really important that we can figure out how to do something with this plant. A few more quotes that will go back to the 1940s that really will start to tie into what we're doing here today. Aldo Leopold, probably the father of restoration ecology, said, "I listened carefully for clues, whether the West has accepted cheat as a necessary evil to be lived with until kingdom come, or whether it regards cheat as a challenge to rectify its past errors in land use. I have found the hopeless attitude almost universal. So even in the 1940s, land managers were throwing up their hands saying, I'm just going to give up, we're going to have cheatgrass, it's here, we're going to have to learn how to manage it. Look at another quote from a researcher out in Nevada that is a little more practical. Is anyone a practical method by which annuals can be replaced and perennials reestablished in a density which would permit saying that the range has been brought back to its pioneer carrying capacity? Dr. Fleming was a researcher with the Nevada experiment station for a long time back in the 40s and 50s. And this, in many ways, is a question that we're trying to answer still today, both of these. It's kind of sad that many years later we still have not found the answer. But there's been millions and millions of dollars of research thrown at this particular species, trying to understand how we can control it, limit its impacts, and restore areas that have been degraded by that. And so Rachel and I were sitting around one night, and we actually watched, we were watching The Biggest Loser on television. And we thought that it would be really cool if we could have a competition like The Biggest Loser, except it was related to weed control and the biggest the person that was best able to restore a site, and that's led us to this restoration challenge. So we do things like this a lot. I know it's going to be a little hard to see in the back. This is an experimental test plot for different herbicides, where you can see all the brownish purple is cheatgrass, and we've got the green in here is good grasses. Now there's a continuum. This site had some good stuff to recover. The site down here below did not have a whole lot of good stuff to recover. We do this kind of thing all the time from a research standpoint. Some of you guys might be familiar with variety trials. We compare different methods or different options in a side-by-side basis, and then people can go out and look at it firsthand. You can get firsthand experience to see what's happening. And really, if you were to walk down to the plots without any background knowledge and just roll around and see that people have done different things, it's no different than a demonstration plot. It's a long-standing, tried-and-true method of education on experiment stations. The thing that's different is we send out an invitation for teams of not necessarily researchers, not university people always, I'd say real people. I know we're real people too, but non-university people, to see how well they could do. That there's a lot of knowledge out of the state and outside the state. I don't want to short you University of Nebraska guys. And see how those different approaches would last. So in some ways it's back to the future. The reason I would say it's back to the future is we're using tried and true methods for sharing for developing information. And I'll share some web-based stuff with you guys that if you want to follow this on the internet, we're going to have videos and things like that so that you can learn. That's kind of where the future comes in. So the challenge itself was to restore your allotted portion of land to a diverse, productive rangeland using any legal method. I had to put legal because we've got a few teams that wanted to do some stuff that was maybe a little bit sketchy. Up to this point, everything that I know of were within legal limits. So just behind us here, if you were to go across a ditch and walk over towards the trees, there are 13 roughly 1/4 acre plots that have been laid out. Teams drew their plot number at random because there is some variability across those. Although on average across the entire area, we're roughly 80% cheatgrass cover and less than about 5% perennial grasses. So this is a highly degraded site. We had 13 teams that signed up, and just so that I can see where the teams are, if you're a part of a team, if you would just take 1 second please and stand up so that we can see how many of you guys are involved. I think that would be great. Okay, so we got that is at least one representative from almost every team. We've got everything from Eastern Wyoming College to some weed and pest folks, game and fish, University of Nebraska at Lincoln, graduate students, undergraduate students, ranchers, and extension people all have submitted teams. And if you get a chance to go down there and look around, there are some dramatically different results in the short term. Now this is the first year of the project. Final evaluations will take place in 2017. Now, one thing that will make it a little bit easier for you as you go down, we've got plot signs on each of the different plots instead of numbers. And we developed a little set of icons that are sort of a quick reference. And once we get our official web page up and running, which will be soon, you'll also be able to use these icons to locate what particular tool that you're interested in. So for instance, I'll just go through them right quick. Fire, any kind of mechanical control methods, so mowing or tilling or things like that. Herbicides, they're kind of intuitive. Grazing of some kind of livestock. Competitive plants, or you might consider it cultural control. And then the middle is a microscope, because if I put a picture of a bacteria, it would have just looked like a little blob, and we probably wouldn't have known what that is. So we do have at least one, potentially two teams that are going to try a newly developed technology that is a cheatgrass suppressive bacteria that you apply to the soil. That is a very new technology that has some promising. So as you walk around at the plots, you'll be able to see these for a quick reference, and then we'll have more details below each of those. Each team will be judged on a number of different criteria, including productivity, how much vegetative production is there for livestock or wildlife to use, diversity, primarily plant diversity, costs of implementation. So if you came in and spent $100,000 on a quarter of an acre, is that really practical for us to do out on the rangelands? Probably not. Scalability. If you used a bunch of graduate students to hand weed your entire plot repeatedly through the summer, you're probably not going to be able to scale that up to thousands of acres. And then each team is also thinking through how to develop an education and outreach program, or they may be thinking that through this winter, a program related to their particular approach. So just to give an idea about some other things, this is a grazing study that we had done where we found that where we did some heavy grazing in the spring, we started to reduce cheatgrass, but we released the annual kochia that was there. So there are some hidden challenges, including some plots that have a little bit of Russian knapweed and Canada thistle that people are going to have to deal with. So even though we're focusing specifically on cheatgrass, the neat thing about this is it's from a management perspective that it shows all the additional difficulties that you would run into rather than just a single entry herbicide trial. So with that, I'll thank some of our partners, of course, UW Ag Experiment Station, Wyoming Section Society for Range Management, Wyoming Weed and Pest Council, and the Wyoming Reclamation and Restoration Center. You can follow us now on Facebook, and that's where we're putting a lot of current details and updates and pictures and videos. That's the big long address there, or if you just go to Google and search Wyoming Restoration Challenge, you can like us on Facebook and see anything that happens there. Our website will be www.restoringrangelands.com, and that should be up and running probably by October.